Hello and welcome to Imperfect, which you can read as imperfect or unperfect, depending on how delusional, optimistic, or freshly moisturized you're feeling that day. This is a podcast about bodies, confidence, shame, self-worth, and all the weird little stories we've picked up about ourselves from family, school, magazines, gym changing rooms, and let's be honest, the internet absolutely losing its mind. For the first episode, I wanted someone who could help us separate what's actually useful from what Dr Joshua Wolrich very brilliantly calls nutribolics, which frankly, I wish I came up with that. Joshua is an NHS doctor, registered associate nutritionist, and author of Food Isn't Medicine. He spends a lot of his time challenging diet culture, weight stigma, and the kind of wellness advice that somehow manages to sound scientific while also making you feel bad about toast. In this conversation, we talk about why so many of us feel at war with our bodies, how shame gets dressed up as health advice, and whether it's possible to build something kinder, more honest, and less completely exhausting in its place. Basically, fewer miracle cures, less moral panic, and absolutely no unsolicited chat about apple cider vinegar. Please welcome to the show a guest I'm really excited about. Dr. Josh, how's it going, buddy?
It's all right, thank you.
You've recently had another baby, right?
We have.
Yeah.
My wife has,
Yeah.
yes. We are 11 weeks in at the moment. He's the easy one. It's the almost 3-year-old she's the difficult one at the moment, which is fair. She's just had her entire world turned upside down a little bit, hasn't she? She's having to share.
Yeah.
But not just toys, share her parents. So I think that's fair. We're giving her a little bit of grace.
Well, thank you for coming. For anyone at home who doesn't know what you do, how would you describe what it is that you do?
I have magically found a way to include all of my hobbies as jobs, which I think is quite nice. So I am a doctor, medical doctor. I work in A&E, but I see that as, again, a hobby rather than my existence or my identity. So I do that like half the week. The other half the week, I started a business essentially as a nutritional counselor. So I work with people on their relationship with food over Zoom, which allows me to work worldwide, which is lovely as well. And that came through my social media stuff, which is somehow fit into the rest of the week. I'm not quite sure how that works, but an unintended influencer was how I fell into the role, is again the title I like to use.
What made you want to work with people and their attitudes towards food?
Probably a mixture of personal experience and then frustration of how, as medical professionals in general, we tend to treat people who don't fit society's norm of super thin. But a lot of it started from my own pretty disordered relationship with food growing up, and then getting sucked into what was quite classic diet culture of believing that I needed to cut everything out of my diet and lose weight to become a better doctor, which was the original kind of justification I had given myself when I was about to graduate medical school.
You thought you had to do that to be a better doctor?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'd always been a kid that knew about my body size, in the sense of I always knew I was larger than other kids. It was always something that if I was to encounter a bully, it would get mentioned. But as a kid, I'd never really tried to do anything about it. Fortunately, I would say. I'd always, my mum was always pretty good at just kind of not putting me on a diet or mentioning anything like that or insinuating that I should. We just had a normal life in that sense, which was lovely. But as I went through medical school and I started being exposed to a lot of the weight stigma that our pretty weight-centric healthcare system works through, I started kind of bringing in all of this stuff around, well, if I'm fat, it means that I'm this and I'm this and I'm this, and I must be lazy and incompetent, and I must set a good example to my patients when I become a doctor eventually, when I graduate medical school. And if I'm fat and talking to patients about health, because those two things are incongruous, right? Like, then I will be limiting myself as to how good a doctor I can be. That was the argument that I had given myself in my head. And so for the first time, I then was super strict with dieting and restricting energy and
I just said that must have been
start to thin.
So, like, how did you? I can't imagine thinking that and then trying to study and
In my head, I went, well, look, if I was running a stop smoking service, right, and I was the doctor running the stop smoking service, and then in my break, I went outside and I had a cigarette, and the people coming in to see me in the stop smoking service walked past me having a cigarette, that would be really stupid. That was the logic I had given myself. And so I went, well, that's the same as my body size. At the time, I thought that was super logical. And there are still probably people listening to this who think that sounds logical, who are like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like but that all came from my assumption that body size was entirely a personal responsibility. A bit like choosing not to smoke. I could just choose to be thin. And because I wasn't choosing to be thin, then I was setting a bad example. There's a lot wrong with that as an analogy. But at the age of 24, I thought that was pretty sound. So I went with it and started to use social media to leverage shame in order to not eat what I thought were the reasons why I was fat. It wasn't with any intention of being an influencer. It was the only time I ever started an Instagram account was to do that. And it was just me and my friends. And I was like, I'll just post everything I eat and then it will keep me accountable. And it ended up turning into something very different.
Yeah.
But that's how Instagram starts for most people, right?
It was
pictures
food.
of foods or cats or landscapes. That was the
food,
original Instagram.
Yeah, a very wholesome beginning of just
with filters and borders.
Yeah, filter. Yeah, and cat ears on yourself as well. That was a thing. Just go back to when you started posting initially, just what you were eating. You said it was to keep yourself accountable, so you could sort of see this is what I'm eating. How do you get that switch? Because a lot of people who post their food, especially if they're talking about whether it's dieting or fitness, a lot of it can turn quite toxic quite quickly. And you've sort of just not gone down that route. You've been sort of very honest and transparent.
You didn't know me 10 years ago.
That's a very good point, yeah.
I started Instagram 12 years ago. So I would argue it was quite toxic at the beginning. My name, I didn't have my name on my Instagram account at the beginning. My Instagram name was Unfattening.
Wow.
So it was, I would argue that was toxic. The whole point, the purpose of that was to unfatten, right? That was my logic. I got trainers that had unfattening written on the side of them. You know, when you could personalize your trainers.
You didn't do that.
I 100% did. And then when I started changing what I was talking about, I scratched off the and just had them as fattening, which I thought was great. It wasn't particularly healthy advice. It was, a lot of it was just banging on the old rhetoric drum of calories in, calories out. I need to count everything I do. I need to scan the box of chocolates in the staff room at work so that I can log that I've eaten a chocolate. But it was only one chocolate because then I could see how many calories are in them. It was toxic.
Was you sort of weighing yourself a lot?
100%. Multiple times a day, because it doesn't count if you only weigh it once, right? Like if it's the morning, it might have been because I haven't done a poo yet. Several. It was all encompassing, and particularly disordered. And it got to a point where I was doing things that nowadays I would argue was slipping into eating disorder territory. But I was justifying it because the end justified the means, right? When we're doing a lot of stuff that is in the pursuit of thinness, whether that be active restriction through food, whether that be pharmaceutically, helped or not. A lot of the time, the actions we're doing are not health promoting, and they are arguably in isolation quite harmful and quite detrimental to our health, right? Like refusing to eat enough during the day that your body is asking for. If we take that in isolation, if your child was doing that, you'd be like, "What? No, you need to eat, right? Like that's not good for you." If an adult's doing it and they're over a certain body size, you're like, "Oh, good for you. You're doing good. You're taking responsibility." And we just justify behaviors that are particularly unhealthy and toxic, right? In order to kind of get to that thing that we think we owe ourselves or our patients or our family or whatever it is in that moment.
I mean, the unfattening is on trainers.
It's a good name, but I'm sad I had to get rid of it because it was pretty clever. But I've just kept it as a placeholder now, so nobody else can own it.
Okay, yeah. Do you ever think if you were like now, you had the same mentality that you did back then? Do you ever think that you would have been more extreme with what's available now? It's sort of like whether it's like you'd be on the jabs and all that sort of stuff.
I don't know.
Because I think to myself, I 100% back then for me.
I think so. I think what probably would have happened if I was in the depths of what was really disordered eating, and I'll, for anybody who is struggling with eating disorder stuff, maybe skip ahead like 45 seconds. But at one point I was chewing my food, spitting it in the bin so that I could get the taste of the food, but not the calories from swallowing it, which again, I'm a doctor for fuck's sake. Like you would think that I would be like, that's not healthy, but I didn't. I didn't recognize it. So I was just like, oh, I won't do it forever. It's just for now. Because I love mince pies and it's Christmas, and then the mince pies won't exist anymore, and then I won't do that anymore. And it just, I think if I was doing that kind of stuff in an environment now with the ease of access to pharmaceuticals that can remove my hunger, I would be worried about myself. And I think, and it's one of the reasons why I'm quite worried about the environment that exists now for people who are in that similar state, because there's millions of them. And being able to remove the thoughts about food, which we maybe come back to later, but are most of the time entirely natural to think about food, and especially to think about food quite obsessively when you spend your entire life trying to ignore the thoughts about food. I think if I were to have access to something that could do that for me, I'm not quite sure where it would end, as long as I had enough money. And I think we are seeing a lot of that too. But yeah, there's a lot of nuance there. But I would argue I would be worse off. I'm glad that was my experience back in kind of when 2020, right, rather than now.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I did every fad diet you can think of. I remember when I was a teenager, I would like starve myself. I wouldn't eat. I would just have 3 milkshakes a day. That was it, and that was my way of trying to lose weight. And I remember a day 4 days of no sort of solid food, and I was like, okay, I can eat now. And I would try and eat, and I just couldn't swallow food because my body was just reject. I just couldn't actually swallow anything, so I had to spend another couple of days. And
almost graduating back to solid food again.
Great way to put it. Yeah, graduating back to solid food. The one thing I will that I think is good, and there's also the bad as well, is there's people like yourselves on social media who's sort of very very honest and open about the food noise, which I love that term, food noise, because it's basically something that I've always had. It's just constantly going, and I have to try and think about it, and personally, I think I think about food more than anything else. Like easily, not even close. Drink, drugs, sex, games, whatever, not even close. It's always been food. And for me, I think a lot of it started from when I was young. Do you find that when you speak to people that it's something, whether it was family or friends or school?
Absolutely. There is never, I've from a one-to-one capacity, I think I've spoken to over 100 people. And not one of them have had an experience where their childhood hasn't been relevant in some way. It's not all the same, right? But we're not. I would be pretty adamant at saying and being confident with the fact that we are not born with food noise. There is a massive genetic variation that exists in terms of body size. That is real, but taking aside some of the nuance around things like ADHD, which can make our experience of hunger and fullness be a bit different. Food noise as a concept, which is only a newish concept too. We used to just call it obsession with food, right? And when we talk about it being obsession with food, we think about it more as, well, what has caused it, right? Whereas food noise as a more universal term, we're now, I would say a lot of us are treating it as, well, it's just something you have or you don't. We don't need to think about why it's there. We just need to think about whether we can help you with it. But I think we're missing the why it's there. We've known for years that the more restrictive a diet you put somebody on, the more they think about food. And that makes sense, both mentally but also physiologically, right? Our bodies are not designed to waste away. It wouldn't be a particularly good evolutionary trait as a species if we were good at losing weight. We're actually really good at holding on to energy and saving that energy and using it as reserves for later, because food hasn't always been something in abundance in our history. And so we've often needed to get through periods where we've been without food. And so thinking about food as a protective mechanism, if you're avoiding food, whether that's deliberately or not, your body doesn't necessarily know why it's happening. All it knows is there's no energy coming in. And so it ramps up all of those signals to your brain to be like, we need to think about food now. We need to go and find food because I need to survive. And so over the years, I am yet to come across anybody who has what would be described as food noise who hasn't been dieting at some point in their life. Right? People who haven't dieted aren't going there saying, I think about food all of the time. And the people that I work with usually start with saying something similar, where they just go, I just think about food all the time. And I go, I'm not surprised, because when have we ever started to genuinely honor what our hunger is? And instead of thinking about it as something pathological, we think about it as a signal that we need to start actually doing something about, rather than seeing it as a negative, seeing it as something of understanding, of going, well, this is why it's here. How many diets have you been on in your life, right? It sounds like quite a lot. And over those years, the noise will have got louder because your brain is trying to protect you. And you're at a point now where you probably feel, what I would imagine would describe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would be in a healthier place mentally with food than you were in the past. And maybe there's not the place for this right now, but the question I would ask if you were a client would be, can you actually trust yourself around it? Or do you still think that you're having to think about it in order to not go back to that place again? Do you have genuine trust around what your body's asking for? Because if not, that's one of the reasons why the noise is still there.
How do you get past that? This is the question. How do you get past it?
Well, the world right now is telling you a drug, right?
Yes.
And I would argue that we look at improving it by understanding where it's come from, right? And so we're not born with any sort of conditions on our food. I've got an 11-week-old and a 3-year-old. When they're hungry, they're hungry. They're not starting to feel hunger and then go, am I though? Right? They feel hunger and they go, I want food, and then they get food and they go, that's better. Whereas as adults, we start feeling something that is probably hunger, and we go, oh no, I can't be hungry yet. I ate like an hour ago, right? So that can't be hunger. Maybe I'm just bored. Maybe I'll distract myself with something else. Maybe I'm thirsty. I've read something online that says I should just be drinking fluids, right? And then see if I'm hungry again in an hour's time. And so we do all of this double guessing around whether A, the hunger is even real. And then when we finally admitted to ourselves the hunger is real, we then do all of this second guessing around what do we then choose to eat, right? And then we start doubting our choices or our desires or our taste preferences. We go, I can't trust what I want to eat because that's why I'm fat, or whatever the logic is in the moment. So you go, I'll eat something else. And then we might have met the physical hunger need, but the mental hunger is still there. We're not satisfied by the food we chose. You get to a restaurant, you're like, oh, that looks really good. No, I should have the salad. You have the salad. Maybe it was enough food, but you're like, well, really boring, right? Like, I want dessert now. I want the satisfaction around food that my body is designed to have too, because we are meant to enjoy food. That's probably my long-winded way of saying I think we should get back to trusting our body again and starting to actually have an element of what sounds a bit scary, but unconditional permission around food. And it's a really hard concept to get to grips with, because having unconditional permission like we used to have as a kid, where we could eat half an ice cream and give it back because it didn't mean anything, right? That unconditional permission removes the obsession. It removes that those constant thoughts about food day in, day out, because it removes a lot of the meaning from it, right? The kid can give an ice cream back halfway through because it doesn't have that meaning of, this is a bad food. This is a food I'm not really meant to have. I'm doing something naughty. This food will make me fat. It's just food. So they're just like, I've had enough. Here you go. I've never finished so many half ice creams in my life since having a 3-year-old. Right? But that's not because she's special. That's what all kids do until we start getting in the way. Until adults start going, no, you have to finish your ice cream because it's a treat. And they go, oh, okay. And then they start learning that an ice cream is something that has to be finished. And so even if they're kind of full, they're like, but I have to finish my ice cream. And it just starts adjusting. We start putting these conditions over food, what it means, whether we're allowed it. And then when that noise starts getting louder, it snowballs.
Can you explain what weight stigma is exactly?
Yeah. I would, there's both internalized and external weight stigma. And most of it is an assumption or a characterization or a stereotyping about who someone is based on their body size. So the more classical one that, we'll get to this in a bit, but I think it has adjusted a bit, which is not a bad thing. But the more classical one tends to be well, if you're fat, you're lazy. So there's an assumption that if somebody looks a certain way, they must have certain behaviors or traits in their personality that is why they are that way. Right? And so we are stigmatizing someone into a certain box, stereotyping them into a certain box, and also treating them differently as a result. It's not just stereotyping, right? It's not just we go, well, lazy people are fat, but we also then treat them differently because we inherently think that they are. That's the external stuff. But the more you're exposed to that, the more we internalize it and start believing it ourselves anyway. So the longer you've lived your life in a body that society says is unacceptable, the more you start believing all of the stuff as to why you are that way, which is a lot of what I did when I was leaving medical school, right? I started internalizing the reasons that I was told as to why patients were fat or people were fat. So I must be lazy. I must not have enough self-control. I must not be dedicated enough. I must eat the wrong things. I must not do this, X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of just blanket statements that get put on people that don't look a certain way. And all of that falls under the bracket of stigma, and it's stigma about people's weight. And scarily, the research around that and around people who are exposed to that chronically, and it tends to be chronic, right? Because people aren't just fat for a month and they're not anymore. People are exposed to chronic stigma around what their body size is. That leads to chronic stress, which is not too surprising, right? It's stressful to go out and constantly be thinking, is that person over there judging what I've just ordered at a restaurant? Or are they looking at me in a funny way because I've got sweat in certain places that they don't because I'm larger than they are and I'm wearing polyester or whatever? And that chronic stress then leads to worse outcomes. So it leads to increased risk of developing things like type 2 diabetes, which we are told exists because you're fat, but maybe it's also because of the chronic stress that you're living under, because it reduces your insulin sensitivity when you're super stressed. And there's research to suggest that there's a similarity between the chronic stress experienced by people with weight stigma and also the chronic stress experienced by those with racism. So interestingly, there tends to be some similarity in the long-term health outcome data between, for example, Black people who are exposed to racism on a regular basis and fat people who are exposed to weight stigma on a regular basis, both slightly higher risk of type 2 diabetes, which is just, something to kind of throw out there in terms of this is something that affects all of us in the way we start talking about this stuff and the way that we think about the complexities of what health looks like and the assumptions that we make about what has led to somebody's health outcomes rather than their own choices and their own responsibility.
As a doctor, I've got to ask you about where are you at with BMI?
Mm-hmm. As a concept?
Yeah. I mean, I remember I had my BMI checked and this was years ago, and it was, I think I couldn't have been any more obese according to the BMI scale. And this was about a decade ago, and it just sent me through a crazy spiral. And I think I lost maybe 2 stone or something. But I just remember it. I remember it stuck in my head, and the guy said,
the number.
and it was in the red. There was like the white, and it goes to red.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, you're really severely obese. And it just always hit me. And I've heard varying degrees of different opinions now on BMI, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
I think we have spent many, many decades trying to find simple ways of making assumptions about patients' health. Quick ways of being able to put people into brackets to then, from a public health perspective, right, to be able to provide resources to certain demographics and groups and things like that. BMI is shockingly flawed as a measure, but from a population level, it's not the most ridiculous an assumption that as people's weight gets to different extremes, be that low or high, then they are more likely to have issues with different health problems. Now, to clarify, whether that's directly related to their weight or whether that's related to correlative things, like, for example, being under chronic stress because of being in a society that assumes people's body size is unacceptable, and therefore is that chronic stress the thing that's actually influencing their health or not? That's a separate issue. But from a population level, I don't have much of an issue with going, there's a group, a demographic of people that maybe we should have higher screening rates for, et cetera, but that's not what happens. What ends up happening is we take a BMI number and we apply it to an individual, not to a population. And at an individual level, it's terrible because everybody is different. And when you take a population level metric and start applying it to you or I individually, we have no idea whether or not there's an accuracy around that. And actually, I would argue as a doctor, I don't need it in any way, shape or form to be able to assess someone's health and to be able to give them good health advice and treat medical conditions that they may or may not have. Whether I know specifically what they look like or not doesn't really change a huge amount about the way that I practice medicine. Because I think that it leads to lazy medicine. It leads to assumptions. It leads to people going, well, your BMI is this, you must have this condition, you must go on this medication, rather than actually treating an individual in front of you. There's complexities around why the BMI number exists and some of the potentially eugenic related reasons behind it and the populations that it was actually developed on, which were lots of very white male.
Has it not
population.
changed since then? Is it basically
it has, but to make it nice, even numbers, not because of a health marker. So the original cutoffs were different.
Yeah.
And at one point overnight in America, they changed the cutoffs to be nice, round, easy numbers and actually reduced the numbers that they needed to be. It helped all of the medical insurance companies in the US charge more money for a whole extra millions of people that suddenly found themselves in the obese or overweight category overnight, which they weren't the day before. They're suddenly unhealthy the next day, right? Because we've suddenly changed the criteria. I mean, I imagine most people have never really wondered why they're such nice round numbers, these cutoffs, right? Why is the obese category 30? How does that make any sense? We've picked a round number and made it made it mean something rather than, that's the wrong way around. That's not how we do health. We look at an individual and we look at them as characteristics and we test them if need be, rather than looking at a number and use it to make an assumption about someone. I would argue BMI is stigmatizing. Right? We talked about stigma and what it is. I would argue that's what it is. And it also is used, unfortunately, especially in the UK, as a way of refusing access to medical care. Right? So if you're over a certain number, you can no longer have that knee replacement that you're on a list for until you're below that number again. What number? I don't know. We'll just arbitrarily make it up. You're not allowed to adopt. They don't tell you that, but there is very, very strong evidence for people over certain numbers not being approved for adoption because the justification is, well, you're not a healthy parent. So we shouldn't give a child to you because we need to give a child to someone who's going to live a long time, even though there isn't a good metric to say you're going to die earlier.
Imagine I'm guessing they don't, but imagine you find out that's the reason why.
I had a client who, and she's told me I can mention this at times, and it's not specific to her either, but I had a client who first came to me because she wanted to lose weight because she was going through an adoption process and they had told her that she had to lose weight in order to pass the process. In the end, we were able to write some very well-worded letters and she was able to gain a healthier relationship with food without shrinking her body. And she now has a child that she's managed to adopt, which is incredible. But the amount of impact that every single review that they'd had, they were like, well, by the next time we have this review, you need to have shown that you've made progress on the weight front. It's like, why? That she had zero health metrics that were abnormal in any way, shape or form related to her body size. And it was just a very old fashioned tick box of this is why. And, super privileged to be able to help her in that, in terms of writing very strongly worded letters to things. But it is wild the amount of stuff that is still used to deny access to care, to just anything, right? Because of somebody's body size. Enter a drug now, right, that can do that. And I'm not surprised that so many people are using it to gain access to care. I don't judge them in any way, shape or form for doing that because they've had access to care, withheld for so long. So if they can go on something like that to access said care or access a knee replacement or access an adoption, Like it's wild that that's part of the game that people have to play, but it is a reality.
Just in regards to that, sort of jabs and whatnot.
Mm.
What are your worries about it?
My main worry is that it's pharmaceutical dieting, right? It is, we have a lot of data around the number of people that start on the drug and how many people actually get to a year while still on the drug, for example. And it tends to be about 50% that aren't on it by a year's time, for many, many reasons, right? Money is obviously quite a big one, but also side effects is also another one, right? Of people just becoming quite uncomfortable with it because it can lead to a lot of nausea and abdominal pain and constipation and things that aren't fun in any way, shape, or form. And so we've got people that go on it, come off it within a year. And then we also know within a year's time, about 50% of those are going back on it again. So we're doing this. We're on it, off it, on it, off it, which sounds like a diet to me, right? We're losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight. Our bodies don't like doing that. We don't get healthier by doing that. Most of the time we get unhealthier by doing that because our body tries to protect us and puts the weight back on in places that are more metabolically active and harder to shift in the future because it's trying to protect us. It thinks we're going through yearly famines. That's not very fun. It doesn't know our goal is to live to 80. Our goal is to live another 10 years, right? Each time. So it feels, for an awful lot of people, it feels very much like dieting just through a pharmaceutical lens now. Now, I said some of this on social media and people got quite angry at me.
I was about to ask you about that.
Because if you take a group of people who have spent their entire lives being stigmatized for their body size, who are now finally being told it's not your fault anymore. We now have these drugs. We finally understand that it wasn't about willpower anymore, because that's what the medical world is now telling them. And we want to provide you access to what we're calling healthcare, right? We want to provide you access to healthcare and to be thin again. And they go on a drug, and the thoughts that feel like obsession around food get quieter, and it feels calmer. And then they start getting thinner, and they feel like they fit more in society, and they don't feel as low from a body image perspective. Get into whether that's long term or not, but in the moment they're like, I'm finally being treated properly. I'm finally thinner. I'm finally being treated like a human being by medical professionals. And now here's this guy who I followed on Instagram for so long, who's always stuck up for us, who's now saying that it might not be a good thing. How fucking dare he? Right? And I get it, but I'm also going to keep saying things that I don't really like, unfortunately, because I am worried and concerned about the way that it's being used and the promises that are being made around its use.
You also worry about there's almost no, I guess, like you said, pharmaceutical type dieting. There's almost no teaching around it about anything, whether it's eating or even exercise. It's just take this drug. That's it. That's it. You'll lose weight. This is all my friends who are on it. They just take it. There's nothing else with it. You just take it. You eat whenever you feel hungry. You lose weight. But then they all have the exact same worry. What do I do if I stop? I can't ever stop taking it, because what happens then? I'll just go back to the way that I was.
Yeah. Because the reason why that noise was there, again, hasn't been thought about. It hasn't really been addressed. It hasn't really been looked at. That's not their fault, to clarify. It's the way we talk about food and the way we talk about weight and the society that we live in. But yeah, there are so many people, especially in the UK. I think the stats are about 95% of people using the drug have accessed it privately in the UK, which is humongous. And a lot of that is because of the really strict criteria in the NHS for prescribing it, which is not a bad thing, right? I think it should be incredibly strict, because it's quite a big deal to suddenly remove people's hunger, right? Like it should be thought of as a big deal. But because you've got so many people accessing it privately, and all of these different private companies are competing against each other to try and get you to get it from them, a number of hoops you have to jump through, the number of in-person or the number of face-to-face consultations you have to have with people don't want to do that because it still feels shameful. And so if they can access a private company online where they just have to send in a selfie right, without their face or whatever, and then they can tick the box that says don't let my GP know that I'm on the drug, and then they get sent it in the post. They're going to pick that one anytime over walking into Boots and having to actually have a conversation with a pharmacist in person, and then having to step on the scales and do all that stuff that is stigmatizing and stressful. And so people are going to pick the one that requires less oversight. And so companies are being encouraged to provide less oversight. They won't say that they are. They will say, well, we provide all of this extra counseling, and you can have a meeting with a nutritionist and they'll talk to you. But as you know, as you've seen, the vast majority of people taking it just take it and just go, great, that's it now. Right. And don't think about the potential harms from a nutritional standpoint or a body composition standpoint, or, well, I think I need to, there's lots of conversations about I need to exercise and lift weights while I'm on it to make sure I don't lose muscle. But I haven't got enough energy to exercise and lift weights because I'm actually not really eating anything. How do I'll just not worry about it. But like, you're right. There's very poor oversight around a lot of this.
Just never seen anything in the weight loss or dieting world take off like this.
It won't last.
You don't think it will?
No. They won't go away. But the longer it goes on for, the more that it will become clear how many people have been on it, off it, on it, off it, on it, off it. And people will start having a bit of a different attitude towards it. I hope so anyway.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, it's still seen as this amazing thing that has barely any negatives to it. But that's not the reality of the literature or the millions of people that are taking it. Right? It's like 2 and a bit million people have taken it in the last year in this country. Half of those no longer on it. Right? Like those are some big stats in terms of about 1 million people have tried it in the last year in the UK, but are no longer on it.
Good point.
These are being sold as forever drugs.
Mm.
But if half the people aren't on it anymore, how can we justify them as forever drugs if they're not being used as such?
Yeah. Thinking about it now, I could definitely see it turning into one of the, like, oh, I want to lose weight for a wedding or something like that.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
I have people that I know who will take it before going on holiday. So that when they're on holiday, they can relax more around food. But that tells you all you need to know, right? The whole point is there's, again, conditional permission around food in their brain and in their life. And so to feel like they can truly enjoy themselves, they need to reduce all of that and starve themselves for a period of time before they go away so that they can then enjoy the holiday without that fear of what that might mean to their self-esteem, to their body image, to what other people think of them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is not a health promoting conversation that is taking place for an awful number of people who are taking these drugs.
Are you often sort of talking with people who were on one of those sort of drugs, and then they're sort of maybe a bit confused as to why they still feel the same way they did?
Yeah, a mixture. I've got clients who have been on them and aren't anymore. I've got clients who are currently on them, who are trying to navigate whether they want to stay on them or not. And I've got clients who are trying to logic through whether they should go on them. Because for people who live in a body size and are constantly told that it's not acceptable, they are going to be thinking about this as an option. Of course they are, because they're being sold it as a solution. And it's really hard to navigate that without knowing who you can talk to and who you can genuinely trust is not trying to sell you something in order to just make you slim down. The number of people who avoid going to the doctors because they've had so many experiences in the past where they've been stigmatized for their size that they don't trust healthcare professionals anymore, because even if they come across someone who's telling them something that doesn't sound like it's related to their weight, they don't know whether they actually are saying something related to their weight and just not mentioning it, because that happens a lot too.
Yeah. Do you find that you're a doctor, you know what you're talking about, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah. Most of the time. Do you find especially with social media and influencers who are do you often see some of them talking about, and you go, you don't know what you're talking about. You're talking to a bunch of people and you're
100%.
leading them down the wrong path.
Most people. Most people, because that kind of stuff does well on social media.
So I used to, back in the day, I was like obsessed with like just bodybuilding culture. just the world of going to the gym, working out as hard as you can, blah, 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 blah. Do you see much of that sort of content? Because the reason I mention it is what's happened is, so back when I was really into bodybuilding, I mean, I'm still a fan now. It was, work out, you eat, get your calories in, all that sort of stuff. And then what happened was that sort of culture blended itself with sort of masculinity, and then it blended itself in politics. And then now we've sort of gone down this sort of Andrew Tate, Lux Maxa route, and it all stemmed from essentially just bodybuilding, going to the gym, working out.
I think it's done I think it's ended up at a crossroads. I think you have got that. But I think you've also got like the Chris Bumsteads of the world, right? Who are now looking more at longevity now, who are actually going, bodybuilding was a part of my life, but actually I know that if I keep doing this forever, I'm not going to be healthy. And so there are a lot of people wanting to be a bit more, I think it's blended more with the functional fitness type group of going, I want to be flexible. I want to be able to sprint and run rather than just lift heavy weights. And actually, I've got big and massive, but I'm not very functional. I can't jump onto a box, and I want to be able to do that too. So I think there's that route, which I think is actually quite positive because I'm seeing a lot less traditional bodybuilding content than there used to be a decade ago. And I think that's a lot healthier for younger generations to see in terms of going, this is an aesthetic thing. They're quite honest about it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like, this is aesthetic. It's not going to be healthy forever. I want to make this something that could be healthy. But then, yes, there are a bunch of the now toxic masculinity that I mean, arguably, they're not actually bodybuilding-esque types in any way, shape, or form either.
Oh, they're not.
But I think some of it has stemmed from the same logic of, to be a man, you have to either look a certain way or act a certain way. And something I've come across recently that I think is probably quite true in terms of why some of this stuff has kicked off is I came across someone who was talking about, as society has become more equal from a male-female perspective, there are a bunch of men who feel very insecure about that. And so they've started going more extreme to counter what they feel is a loss of their identity, because their identity was rooted in being a man and what being a man felt like. As that's being taken away from them, that's what they think is happening, right? Then they're like, we have to go the opposite direction. We have to then be more aggressive, more violent, more ridiculous, more women should have no rights, rather than just, we should have equal rights as long as I'm in charge, to now women should have no rights and I'm in charge because I'm a man. I feel like it has shifted the spectrum of that because there is a natural pushback against equality. And it's quite scary with two kids, put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, you are right. I always feel like everything has to have its extreme versions for some. I don't know why we can't just like have nice things and then it just becomes really, really toxic. It just always goes down that route. I guess it's just
the extremes always existed, but they never had a platform to encourage other people to think that it was a valid opinion. Right? You go 20 years ago and there might be some random man in your town yelling about how the moon landing was fake, but everybody knew he was mad, right? And nobody paid any attention to him. And they were like, oh yeah, there's Bob. He's yelling about the moon landing again. It's fine. Just look the other way. Whereas now, every single individual in that town across the whole world can join each other on social media. And so they can all find this community that they think is massive, but it's actually really tiny.
Yeah.
But now there's suddenly these whole conferences that go on about how the world is flat and the moon landing didn't happen, right? Whereas before, that used to just be the crazy person in town. Whereas now they've found other people that also think the same conspiracies as them, and it validates the behavior.
Yeah, and I guess it's like what you talked about in terms of how men want, they don't want the equality anymore at all. They want to be 100%.
I want the equality, just to clarify. but I think there's a difference, because I grew up in a household where my dad was the house husband and my mum went to work. So I never thought of, I was never exposed or told that these kind of magical traditional values were the right way. And if anything tries to harm that, then it must be fought against at all costs.
You never had a guy in like a really bad suit telling you crypto is the way forward, or Bitcoin.
Well, I'm too old for that, or too young for that, whichever way around that is. Fortunately, not. Although I feel like I was around the time when Life Plus was being sold.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, colloidal silver drops for the back of your throat was the way forward. That was what my dad was into, anyway.
Do you ever feel like there's a bit of that you're fighting against all of this, and it's because especially when I go on social media, I see so much of just that sort of stuff all the time.
You sort your algorithm out.
I really do. I miss when it was just like cats and food, and now it's just guys telling you to buy peptides and stuff.
I think your social media will show you what you engage with, and that's not always liking engaging, but it is also watching all the way through out of interest. So my social media is an absolute shithole because I save an awful lot of nonsense posts in order to maybe react to them later or make content about them later. My Instagram doesn't know that. It just knows I'm saving all of these dodgy posts.
You are the most toxic person.
So it keeps showing more of them to me, right? So like there was a while when Instagram was not, and it's starting to change a little bit, interestingly, but I would never scroll Instagram because Instagram was a nightmare to scroll in terms of for my mental health, because I was just seeing all this frustrating, angering stuff. TikTok was great because I didn't save any nonsense on TikTok. So it was just showing me comedy stuff and I loved it. That's changed, but I think there is we're needing to purge our algorithms is not a terrible thing, because it gives us a poor perception of what actually is out there. Like the amount of content that is horrendous toxic masculinity exists, but it's actually a lot less than we might be led to believe. But our algorithms like drama, and we watch that content more because we're like either slightly enthralled by it to be like, what the hell are they speaking about? But also like angered by it. So we're like, I want to see what this argument is so I can argue against it. The platform just knows you're watching it for longer, and we need to have a slightly more of a red line to stop.
Yeah, it really does. I wish I could just wipe it.
You can start again.
Just
reset your algorithm.
That's a lot. That's a lot, though, isn't it? Just going through and just unsave it.
Just click those 3 buttons that says "Show me less of this content" every time you come across something dodgy.
Not interested.
Exactly. Wish we could do that in life in general.
Is there any content out there on social media around whether it's fitness, diet, and weight loss that you don't want to see anymore?
Yes, but then I would struggle to do my job.
I was just going to say
because I need to see it, because I need to know what everyone else is seeing. But if I wasn't this unintended influencer and I was just my Mr. Joe Blogs doing my stuff, I would love to just see. I would love to see woodworking videos. I would love to see stuff about making food, but nobody's ever mentioning calories in any way, shape, or form. And I would probably love to see kind of like interesting exercise ideas that had nothing to do with the number on the scales either. I would like to just have all of the weight stuff removed from conversation, and just be shown something that's interesting, rather than always having to work out if they were going to slip in something about it being low calorie right at the end and be like, oh, and also you can eat the whole thing. It's like, I don't want to eat the whole thing. I just want to have a serving, please.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah, I'm currently going through home redoing my house, so just decorating content and hacks. It makes me
I want to know how to build shelves. I don't want to see any more stuff about GLP-1s.
Invisible shelves. Nothing makes me happier than seeing someone put up a set of invisible shelves.
Cast iron underneath. Sometimes it doesn't need to be hidden. Sometimes it's all right.
But cast maybe a little light. Have you gone with a little light?
A little light, LED strip or proper light?
Oh, maybe a little LED strip.
Recessed.
There we go. Look at us.
We'll share content ideas later.
Dr. Josh, thank you so much for doing the podcast. What I want to know is, what do you have coming up? What's happening? Books, social media, where can the people come and follow you?
Can I be? I was going to write a second book, but the publishers told me that they didn't think that there was any need for books that didn't talk about weight loss anymore. So that's fun. But eventually I will write another book that's aimed towards people who don't want to lose weight at all costs, but we've got to get the publishers on board for that one. I'm starting this, but I am creating a course for people who want to find some sort of freedom from the context of GLP-1s. So I will be making something for people who are thinking about going on one, who are currently on one and worried about stopping, or have stopped and are worried about what to do next, or feel that they're not quite sure what the current situation is. So that will be coming up, but I have to keep an eye on my socials to find out when. But that's the plan.
Love that. Thanks so much for doing the show.